Correspondent Kate Fisher. Good evening, Kate. Now, take us through the conditions of the sanctions that have been placed on these senior Boko Haram leaders.
Well, these sanctions are aimed at people who have been facilitating terrorism and violence, and the US Treasury Department, the US government believes these two men have been. It means that any assets they have here in the United States or in any US jurisdictions across the world will be frozen, so they'll have absolutely no access to them. They'll also be unable to use any US financial institutions, so any international transactions they hope to do that involve any kind of US bank or financial institution at any point throughout that transaction period will not be able to go ahead. They won't be able to do that, so they're going to probably not have access to a lot of their own money. They're also unable to engage with any Americans in this kind of way, so they won't be able to buy or sell or trade anything with any American under these economic sanctions that have been imposed.
Kate, what does the US Treasury hope to achieve with these sanctions?
Well, sanctions are always used. I actually spoke to the Treasury Department after we got this news release, and they told me this is all about trying to change behaviour. They want to put as much pressure on these men as possible to force them to stop doing what they're doing with Boko Haram and change their ways. So it's all about putting as much economic pressure on them to do that. So they're hoping that by pushing them where it hurts, which is their finances, their money, their access to funds, access to cash, this may make them stop helping, aiding, abetting and working with Boko Haram. It's kind of the step that the government takes before more kind of military action. So yeah, this is all about changing behaviour, doing what they can to try to make these men rethink. And it's timely, I think, that this has been introduced in the same year that Boko Haram have pledged their allegiance to the so-called Islamic State, and clearly the rise of that terrorist group is a huge concern here in the US as well. So yeah, it's all about trying to make them stop and think and change what they're doing in relation to their activities with Boko Haram.
Kate, now you've just mentioned that the Treasury is hoping that this will lead to a change in behaviour. What happens to those who continue to do business with these individuals?
Well, they will be pursued as well by all the authorities in the US. Under these sanctions, Americans are prohibited from dealing with these two men, so they would also face some kind of comeback from the authorities here in the US if they do try to engage in any activities with them. But because of the sanctions, any sort of financial transaction, economic activity would be stopped anyway by the institutions involved, so it would be difficult for that to happen. But yes, they also face the jurisdiction of the US authorities.
Now, the US has so far dispatched no less than 300 personnel to assist in the fight against Boko Haram from neighboring Cameroon. Is this producing the desired result, and what is the ongoing debate about increased assistance to Nigeria?
Yes, I think it is interesting that we've had these sanctions today, and then just in October, those 300 US troops were sent to Cameroon to help in the fight. So certainly the issue of Boko Haram, the threat they pose, is something that is very much in the minds of people here in Washington and in the US government. They clearly recognize the threat and the problem. Whether any more troops will be sent, it's difficult to know. The president said when he announced that deployment that they would remain in Cameroon for as long as needed. That's been now it'll be 2 months in a couple of weeks' time. Whether we get to see any more come out, it depends. Certainly since President Buhari has taken power in Nigeria, there does seem to be more openness from the US for military and strategic help to Nigeria in the fight against Boko Haram. There seems to be a better relationship between Buhari and the White House. they seem to see that they welcome the fact that he is trying, or at least saying that he's trying to tackle corruption, and that has been one of the big stumbling blocks in the past, with the US offering more military support to Nigeria. And certainly it's interesting that we've had this 300 troop deployment and now these extra sanctions. It certainly does look like the US is taking this threat very seriously, and I'm sure part of that is because of the allegiance that Boko Haram pledged to the Islamic State earlier this year.
Now, just finally, Kate, with the US adding more reinforcements in the fight against Boko Haram, would we see President Barack Obama roping in some of the other bigger nations to make sure that this fight is won?
I think he would like to see that. He would see the threat of international terrorism as not just a Nigerian problem, an African problem, an American problem, but as a global problem. So yes, he has talked about the local, the Cameroon, Chadian forces from Nigeria, all who have worked together against Boko Haram, and praised that cooperation between those regional forces. And I'm sure that yes, he would. He's also praised the help that the French military have offered as well. So yes, I do think that he would welcome any more international input into this. The coalition that the Americans are leading in the fight against the Islamic State in the Middle East is an international coalition, and the US is very clear that they welcome anybody's input on that if they are willing to commit those time, money and troops.
Well, Kate, it seems like the fight against Boko Haram is certainly intensifying. Thank you so much for that update. That was our correspondent, Kate Fisher, joining us live from Washington.